What kind of woman kneels before a stranger and offers the only skill she has left just to survive another day? That question echoed through Sarah May Hawkins's heart the moment she whispered the words that would change her life forever. "I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook." It was the last sentence of a woman who had lost everything except the strength to keep going. Hello, my dear friend. This is Jasper Ashwood, your narrator of Mountain Tales. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. A big hug to you all, and I hope you enjoy the story. 4 weeks earlier, Sarah May Hawkins was a wife with a quiet life, a small cabin, and simple dreams. She had no idea her world was about to collapse without warning. It began on a gray morning when the men in dark coats knocked on her door. Their faces were cold, their eyes sharp, and in their hands were papers filled with signatures she had never seen before. "Ma'am, you have 1 week to vacate the property," the man with dark glasses said, his voice colder than winter wind. At first, Sarah thought they had the wrong house. Her husband had been careful, responsible, a good man. But the truth hit her like a hammer. He had left her with crushing debts she never knew existed. Debts that demanded everything she owned. The cabin, the furniture, even the blankets on her bed. She begged them to listen, tried to explain she had not signed anything, that she knew nothing about investments or failed deals. But the law was clear. Marriage meant shared responsibility. And shared responsibility meant that now, the burden fell on her alone. When the men left with the last pieces of her life loaded onto their wagons, Sarah stood in the empty cabin, staring at walls that no longer belonged to her. The silence felt like a weight on her chest. With shaking hands, she gathered the only things they considered worthless: a worn iron skillet, a cracked clay pot, and a wooden spoon smoothed by years of use. These 3 items were all she had left. With a small bundle on her back, she walked away from the home that had once been her safe place. She did not look back more than once. Looking again would have broken her completely. The trail ahead of her was long, dusty, and merciless. The sun burned her skin by day, and the cold numbed her bones by night. She slept under trees, drank water from streams, and ate whatever berry she recognized. Her feet were blistered, her clothes were torn. But she kept walking. On the 3rd day, when her strength was nearly gone, she reached a tiny settlement at the base of the mountains. Her heart filled with hope. Where there were people, there was work. Where there was work, there was food, maybe even a roof. She straightened her dress the best she could and knocked on the first door. "Good evening," she said softly. "I'm Sarah May. I'm looking for work. I can cook anything you need." The door shut in her face. At the next house, she didn't even finish her sentence. "We don't hire strangers," the man said, slamming the door hard enough to stir dust off the porch. An elderly woman looked her up and down with fear. "Bad luck follows the homeless," she muttered before closing her door too. House after house, rejection after rejection. Sarah felt herself shrinking. She wasn't asking for charity, just a chance to work. But the townspeople saw only a ragged stranger with dirt on her dress and shadows under her eyes. When the sun began to set, Sarah sat alone in the empty plaza, her stomach aching with hunger. With the last coins she had, she bought a handful of dried beans. It was all she could afford, and in that dusty plaza, she decided to do something bold. She gathered wood, lit a small fire, and placed her cracked clay pot on the flames. She added water from the public well, poured in the beans, and reached into her small cloth pouch. Inside were the last spices she owned, tiny pieces of thyme, a bit of pepper, a pinch of garlic she had saved for moments she thought would never come again. As the beans simmered, a warm, rich aroma filled the air. The scent drifted across the plaza, down the streets, and toward the open doors of the general store. It was the smell of comfort, of home, of memories Sarah thought she would never touch again. An old man with white hair approached slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. "Smells mighty fine, daughter," he said in a gentle voice that trembled with age. "Been a long while since I smelled cooking like that." Sarah offered him a tired smile. "It's just beans, sir, but I did my best." He sat beside her, and the two ate together, half for her, half for him. No plates, just kindness shared between strangers. When he finished eating, tears filled the old man's eyes. "My wife cooked like this," he whispered. "Haven't tasted food made with heart in over 12 years. Sarah lowered her head, and for the first time since losing everything, she felt seen. He listened to her story from beginning to end. When she finished, the old man took a deep breath and said words that would change her fate. "There's a ranch," he said softly. "Stone's Mountain Ranch. They need a cook. The owner is a hard man, but he values good work. It's 15 miles from here. If anyone will give you a chance, it's him." Sarah felt hope flicker inside her chest. That night, under a sky filled with stars, she walked toward the mountains, clutching her bundle and the old man's directions like a lifeline. She did not know it yet, but the man she was about to meet, Jed Stone, would change her life in ways she could never imagine. Sarah reached Stone's Mountain Ranch at sunrise, her feet aching, her legs trembling, but her heart determined. The ranch was larger than anything she expected, with fields stretching far across the valley, barns standing tall, and ranch hands already at work. She paused at the ridge for a moment, letting the sight steady her. This place could save her life or break her again. When she walked through the front gates, the workers turned to stare. She knew what they saw. A tired woman in a torn dress, boots worn thin, hair messy from days on the trail. But she lifted her chin anyway. "I'm looking for work," she said. A stocky ranch hand laughed. "Work? Lady, this ain't no charity house." But before he could say more, a deep voice came from behind her. "I'm right here." Quote, Sarah turned and saw a man taller and stronger than anyone she had ever seen. Jed Stone. Broad shoulders, dark hair touched with gray, eyes sharp and unreadable, like a storm he carried inside himself. He looked her over slowly, not cruelly, but carefully, like a man who had seen enough lies in his life to question every truth. "You came all the way here looking for work?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady even as her legs shivered. "I can cook." "Many said the same," Jed answered. "None lasted long." "I don't accept sloppy work." Sarah held her ground. "Give me 7 days. If my cooking isn't good enough, I'll leave without a word." The ranch hands whispered among themselves. No one challenged Jed Stone. No one bargained with him. But this weary woman had just done both. Jed studied her in silence. Then, finally, "You get 1 week." Relief washed over her so strongly she almost fell to her knees, but she steadied herself and nodded. "Thank you, sir." Quote, Jed called for Buck, a friendly older worker, and told him to show her the kitchen and the small room behind the bunkhouse. The room was tiny, just a narrow bed, a table, a stool, and one small window. But to Sarah, it felt like a mansion. She touched the sheet with gentle fingers. Clean, safe, hers. That night, she barely slept. She lay awake planning every dish, every spice, every moment. Tomorrow, she would prove her worth. Before dawn, she was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She lit the fire, mixed flour for biscuits, cracked eggs into a bowl, chopped onions and dried meat. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had cooked all her life. By sunrise, the kitchen smelled like home. The ranch hands entered the dining room sleepy-eyed, then froze. Warm biscuits, creamy eggs, stewed meat seasoned perfectly, strong coffee. The table looked like a feast compared to what they were used to. They stared. Sarah simply said, "Please, sit down." One by one, they tried the food. And one by one, their faces changed. Surprise, appreciation, awe. Buck took a bite and let out a long breath. "Ma'am, this is real cooking." The others nodded, whispering to one another like children tasting something magical for the first time. But none of it mattered until Jed tasted his plate. Sarah prepared his tray with extra care and handed it to Buck. Inside his study, Jed barely looked up from his ledger book when Buck entered. "Leave it there," he muttered. Buck placed the tray and walked out with a smile. For several minutes, Jed continued writing, until the smell reached him. He lifted the biscuit, took a bite. His jaw stopped moving. His gaze sharpened. He lifted the eggs next. Then the meat. When he finished the last bite, Jed closed the ledger book and stared at nothing for a long moment. That woman was different. Over the next few days, Sarah cooked 3 meals a day for 19 hungry men, and every meal was met with praise. The workers grew happier, worked harder, laughed more. Even the atmosphere of the ranch felt lighter. But not everyone behaved well. 3 younger ranch hands, boys barely in their 20s, started whispering when Sarah walked by. At first, the comments were small. Then they became bold. Then vulgar. Sarah tried to ignore it. She couldn't lose her job. She needed this place. She needed this chance. But each day, their voices became harder to bear. The trouble came to a head during breakfast. "Hey, Sarah May," one boy said loudly. "How about you come over to my place after supper? I'll show you some real appreciation." Laughter erupted around him. Sarah froze, eyes burning, shame crawling up her throat. Then, silence. Every man turned. Jed Stone stood in the doorway. He had heard everything. His face darkened, hard as cold steel. He stepped forward, slow and controlled, and the boy who had spoken shrank back. "That woman works here," Jed said in a low, dangerous voice. "You will treat her with respect." "Boss, we were just joking." Jed cut him off. "If I hear one more word like that, you'll be off this ranch before sunrise." No one spoke. No one even breathed. Jed looked at each of them with a stare that could burn through bone. Then he turned to Sarah. For a brief second, their eyes met. In his gaze, she saw something she didn't expect. Not anger, not annoyance. Protection. Deep, unspoken, undeniable. Later that night, when Buck returned from Jed's study with the empty supper tray, he carried a message. The boss said everything was perfect. He cleaned the whole plate. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And she had no idea that her greatest test and Jed's deepest wounds were about to collide in a way neither of them could have imagined. The sky over Stone's mountain ranch turned dark and heavy the next afternoon. Thick clouds rolled across the peaks, bringing the sharp smell of storm. The men hurried their chores, tying down equipment and closing the barn doors against the wind. Sarah worked faster than usual in the kitchen, preparing supper early. Everyone would need a hot meal before the storm hit. Then the lightning struck. A blinding flash lit the sky, followed by a deafening crack that shook the ground. Sarah dropped the spoon in her hand and ran outside. Flames shot upward from the hay barn, bright orange and wild, climbing the walls like hungry beasts. The wind fed the fire, pushing the flames higher, hotter, louder. The ranch hands ran in every direction. Buck shouted orders. Men scrambled for buckets, and horses kicked inside the stable, sensing danger. But one man stood completely still. Jed Stone. He stood only a few yards from the burning barn, eyes wide, face drained of all color, hands trembling. His breath came shallow, uneven. He wasn't watching the fire. He was trapped inside a memory. "It's the same," he whispered, "the same as that day. The fire, she was in there. I couldn't save her." Buck grabbed him by the shoulders. Boss, you need to tell us what to do." But Jed couldn't speak, couldn't move. The memory of his wife's death had taken all strength from his body. The men panicked. No one led. No one decided. And the fire grew stronger. That was when Sarah stepped forward. A woman who had lost everything, who carried nothing but courage and a cracked clay pot, lifted her voice with a force that cut through the chaos. "Everyone, listen to me." The men stopped. Her voice held something sharp, steady, and commanding. "You 3, get water buckets from the well. Move fast," she ordered. "You 2, open the stable and take the horses to the north field. Keep them away from the wind." "Buck, get Mr. Stone away from here." Take him behind the house." Her orders were clear, simple, and strong. The workers obeyed without question. Sarah ran into the kitchen, soaked a cloth under cold water, tied it over her nose and mouth, and sprinted back to the barn. She joined the men, passing buckets in a chain, throwing water over the flames again and again. Heat singed her arms. Sparks burned holes through her dress. Smoke stung her eyes. But she did not stop. "Keep it going," she yelled. "We can still save the stable." Minutes felt like hours. The fire roared, cracking wood and collapsing part of the barn roof. The men's hands blistered from carrying metal buckets, but they didn't quit. Sarah moved up and down the line, encouraging them, directing them, giving them the strength they needed. At last, after nearly an hour of brutal effort, the final flame hissed under a bucket of water and died with a thin trail of smoke. The barn was damaged, half of it lost, but the stable was untouched, the horses safe, the men unharmed. Sarah dropped to her knees, gasping for air, her arms trembling from exhaustion. Black soot covered her skin. Her hair was plastered to her face with sweat. But she had done it. She had saved the ranch. When she finally found the strength to stand, she saw Jed sitting near the fence, head in his hands. Buck was beside him, murmuring softly. Sarah walked toward them with careful steps. "Mr. Stone," she said gently. Jed raised his head. His eyes were red, his breath shaky. The strongest man she'd ever known now looked lost and broken. "I froze," he whispered. "I saw the fire, and all I could think of was Mary Ellen. I heard her scream that night. I hear it every time I close my eyes. I should have saved her. I should have." His voice cracked. Sarah knelt beside him and placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "Everyone carries pain. Everyone has moments they can't face. But look around you, Jed. Everyone is safe. No one was hurt. The ranch is standing. You survived this." Jed stared into her eyes, and she saw the truth of him. Not the ranch owner, not the feared boss, but the wounded man beneath. "You saved everything," he whispered, "when I couldn't do anything." Sarah shook her head. "I just did what needed to be done." "No," Jed said. "You did more than that. You were brave. You were strong. You were everything I wish I still was." A long silence hung between them. Not heavy, but full of something unspoken. Something warm. Something new. In the days that followed, Jed changed. He began stopping by the kitchen more often. Sometimes he brought extra firewood. Sometimes he fixed things in her room without being asked. The crooked table leg. The window that didn't close right. He never said a word about it, but she noticed. Sarah found herself waiting for his footsteps, waiting for his quiet presence, his gentle questions about her day, his small smiles that he tried to hide. And Jed watched her too. He watched how she worked, how she moved, how she cared for the men, how she brought warmth to every room she entered. He found himself lingering in doorways just to hear her voice. One quiet evening, long after the men had gone to sleep, Sarah sat on the back porch looking at the stars. The night was peaceful, the air cool. Jed stepped outside and joined her. For a while they sat in silence. "Sarah May," Jed finally said, his voice soft. "When you came here and said, 'I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook,' you were wrong." She looked at him, caught off guard. "You're worth more than you know," he continued. "You brought life back to this ranch, back to these men, back to me." Her heart thumped hard. "I don't want you to stay just as my cook," Jed said, his voice low and honest. "I want you to stay because this ranch is your home now. And I'd like to share that home with you, not as your boss, but as someone who cares for you deeply." Sarah felt warmth spread through her entire body. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief, of healing, of hope. She reached for his hand. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like two pieces that had always belonged together. And under the quiet stars of the mountain valley, two wounded hearts finally found a place to rest, a home, a future. each other.